Most great businesses eventually face one obvious challenge. That's the moment that leadership has to change hands. It's unavoidable, it's inevitable, it's important. One of the best things I ever learned about that came from an unlikely place. That was when I ran high school track and field. Decades later, I still think about it every time I help a company hand off leadership without losing speed. In the 4x100 relay, my team set a record that stood for decades. With the exception of one of the sprinters on the team, and it wasn't me, we were not the fastest runners. But we were exceptional at handoffs, and our handoffs are what won the races. We built systems that made every exchange predictable. We counted the paces, we marked the tracks so we knew exactly when to start running. We used a single word, stick, to signal the handoff. No one ever looked back, no one ever slowed down. We just knew that the runner handing off and the runner receiving it were going to be ready, and we knew how to time it perfectly. And that's how a team without the fastest sprinters became the fastest team. And that's exactly what succession should look like for you. Seamless, practiced, and precise. Today, I'll show you how to plan a leadership handoff that keeps your company moving forward without losing momentum. Okay, when clients ask me about succession and they're looking for ways to do that that'll be as undisruptive as possible, I often ask them about their vision, how clear their vision is, because their vision is their North Star. It will guide them through the kind of steps that they need to take for a successful succession to happen. And as we explore vision, you start to get an understanding of the kind of organization you want to build. So let's say, for example, that part of your vision is to double your operations within the next 3 to 5 years. And there's going to be a succession that will take place within the next year. Well, in that case, the leader that you need to bring in needs to be not a leader who can replace the responsibilities of your current leader, but the kind of leader who can carry an organization and build an organization that's twice as large as where you currently are at. Additionally, that organization is going to have a much more complicated and involved staffing structure, most likely, than your current one does. And so that starts to give you an understanding of the kinds of people and positions that this new leader needs to be able to manage. And all of that becomes important data for understanding the kind of successor that you're looking for. Now, there's a tendency oftentimes to skip this step, and I'm going to elaborate on it in a little more detail here in a bit. But the tendency is to skip these steps because people just want to pick the person that's going to be coming in. And a lot of this has to do with a psychological need for closure. We want to know the answer to the question so we can relax. The problem is we often falsely identify what we believe is the right answer to the question for any number of reasons, but we often haven't identified what they need to lead. Therefore, we can't possibly know who is the right person to lead it. And that's the key message. Even if you don't watch any further, that's the key message that you need to take from this video. You need to know and take time to sketch out what will be led in the future so that you can identify the ideal and prepare the ideal successor. Now let me dive into a little bit more detail around that because this usually includes some things that people don't anticipate. So the first part of this is to start out with the assumption that if you're going to grow your organization or whatever your vision is, that you're going to have to build your existing team, not just try to find staff for that. There's a couple of reasons for that. One is right now and for the foreseeable future, the labor market is pretty tight. It's not easy to find qualified people in time for when you need them. And so becoming good at, you do want to be able to attract good new people, but becoming good at building the people you have and getting them to their highest capacity possible is a skill that the winning organizations will develop and will master. That's going to become a key to strategic success for organizations. The second part of this is strategic staffing, which I talk about elsewhere and have another video on. There should be a link to that down in the details below. But strategic staffing is an exercise. Now, when it comes strictly to succession, you're thinking about what kinds of staffing changes is succession likely to trigger. But if you're also looking at your vision, and if your vision, let's say you have a vision, let's have a very simplistic vision of saying that in 3 to 5 years, you hope to double your company. So right now, you've got a company with a very simple org chart, just to keep it easy to draw. And we know that in a certain period of time, 3 to 5 years, we want to have a more complicated org chart where there's more levels of management, more complexity, more going on. Now, it's very possible that that these same people here may or may not be able to manage this kind of complexity. It's obvious that you have more people involved in the future than you do right now. The very fact of the matter is that this job is not the same thing as this job. It's a different kind of responsibility. It takes different skill sets than you need over here. And so if you're bringing in a new person and you don't want to lose momentum, you want to bring in the person that can grow the company from here to there and then successfully lead this larger, more complicated organization. And that's the basics of strategic staffing. There's a lot more to it. You can watch the other video on that, but really the core of it is understanding this is where we want to go, and so we need to build a staffing model and a plan that gets us to there. But for succession, it really comes down to understanding who does this person need to be, because they're going to have different skills, different capacities, different energy levels, different aptitudes than this. And I mentioned this earlier, but just to reinforce it, because I do see people wanting to skip this, especially if you're replacing a beloved, outgoing leader, there's a tendency to try to find this same person. But the problem with that is that same person is really good at running this organization here. They may not be the right person to run that organization. And I have seen on a number of occasions, when you get the right person into that slot, they can just blow up the organization in a good way. But if you put the wrong person in because you're trying to replace this individual right here, not bring in a leader for the future organization, you can actually start to create problems within the organization, and you actually get failures within the organization. Many leaders feel stuck when it comes to succession. This often shows up because the business wasn't really built to run without you. But succession isn't just about finding the right person. It's about creating systems that keep the company moving even when you need to step back. So, if you want to break free, I've built a practical resource called Succession 360. It will show you how to prepare your team, protect momentum, and lead succession with confidence. The link for that is in the description below. So, the typical path that I like to encourage people to think about, and this will dramatically help smooth out the bumps in succession, is to think about how you begin to place these people. These three different roles are the three core functions that every organization has. One over here is finance and admin. Those are often combined in smaller organizations. They may separate as you get larger. Then you have ops right here. And then you have some kind of business development or sales, whatever fits your profession over here. These are the three primary functions. In most cases, in most businesses, and most nonprofits for that matter, the head of the organization tends to be very skilled at either fundraising or sales or business development, or they're very skilled at ops. They typically, their highest skill is usually not in finance and administration. So what I recommend is that in your plan and in your anticipation is that you begin handing off, and this can happen before the succession takes place, where this leader here starts handing off responsibilities to this individual. So if you're from a very small organization and this is not a staffed position, I would make sure that this position is in place with somebody who has a very high level of capacity, and ideally the kind of capacity to run this larger organization. If they don't, you want to begin putting a plan into place for how do we bring the kind of person in that we need who will be able to run this more complicated financial and administrative structure. It's possible it'll also need to be divided out at this point. Typically, this person, as I said, is going to either be stronger on the operations side or on the sales side. My recommendation is whatever their second best strength is. If they're really, really good at sales, then I would take operations and make this the next high level hire. And this is where you start to do maybe pre-succession, if we want to call that, before we actually begin to move over. If this person's leaving in short notice, then these are just people that you want to begin thinking about. We need to bring these positions in, because if we're going to grow this out, these become key roles. But you start to fill this position here, and you get this off of their shoulders. And then the last thing that you do is you take the skills that the senior leader is best at, and that's the last one that you typically hand off. Then this person stays in a place of strategically doing sort of the big deals or mentoring or handling more complicated issues. All of this becomes preparation for setting up for this more complicated or future organization, even if it's not intended to be more complicated. Here's why you want to do this before the handoff at this level. If you have these three positions, these three functions in place with highly competent people, the organization can run pretty well even if this person is gone. It's not going to run well for a long time, but it can run well long enough to find stability. And this can kind of function as a shock absorber of sorts if there's instability in the organization. For example, if there's a sudden emergency type scenario and the leader's gone. It gives you some time because you have so much institutional strength right here. You have enough time to hand off to the new leader. Additionally, if you're having a normal planned handoff and there's some time to execute that, and you bring in the new leader and you've got this really solid executive team here, again, as I said, they function as sort of a shock absorber in the organization. So as this person is pursuing new strategic initiatives and growth, getting to know the organization, getting to know the company, there's this thick layer of institutional history in the organization that can provide a lot of strength and resilience for the existing people that were already there, but also helping carry on the culture from the past to the future. The second thing that I encourage, if it's possible, is to start identify a second. You can do that over here where each person gets a little helper. You can have more than one helper if you want, but each person should have a helper. So if your finance person takes a vacation, there should be somebody that can step in for a week or two for that individual. Same thing if your ops person is gone, there should be somebody that can step in for them and for the salesperson in the same way. They shouldn't be, this function shouldn't be entirely dependent on the presence of that individual. And so what you're doing is you're creating resiliency, staffing resiliency throughout the organization. And this matters a lot because what happens is it's not just a matter of if this person leaves. If your finance person goes away and nobody knows how to do the books, the organization screams to a halt. It becomes a significant problem. Same thing if your salesperson goes away for whatever reason and you only had one person who really drove sales. Now you've got a big air bubble in your pipeline, and that's going to be a massive problem not too far down the road. And so you want to make sure that you pretty quickly develop people who can help them. The benefit is if there's succession, and if any one of them, for any reason, has expanded responsibilities, they already have the second person who can step in and carry some of those responsibilities. Additionally, if for any reason one of them decides to leave around the time of succession, they just don't click with this leader, they decide they want to retire too, whatever it is, there's somebody already there who's ready to step in. And so you want to be able to have that because it provides that shock absorption so that the organization doesn't shake all over the place when there's these transitions. All of this stuff will be somewhat disruptive and felt, but you can reduce and mitigate a tremendous amount of it just by having a well thought through team built early on. The thing I want to point out here is I'm not talking about how to prepare this person or that person very much when it comes to having a seamless transition between the two. What we're really talking about is preparing your organization to operate without a high level of dependency on this position. For some people, that's super scary. And so that brings me to my last point, which is identity. A leader's identity, if it's very tied on becoming being the smartest person in the room, the person who has all of the answers, the person who solves all the problems, whatever it is, if that leader is very tied or associated with that identity in that way, then they just can't help it. They create dependency on themselves. And so when they're gone, it's very disruptive. A wiser leader, a healthier leader, a more effective leader is intentionally nurturing the ability of the entire organization to operate whether or not they're there. And the challenge for that is that many leaders feel like, well, what value do I have if I'm not there? If I'm not there doing the work, if they can't see me providing, bringing in the revenue, if they can't see me getting the work done, whatever it is. The reality is your team isn't worried about that. They're not even thinking about it. They may not even notice. What they're thinking about is their job. And if anything you do makes their job easier, they're fine. That's all they needed to know. I mean, 9 times out of 10, that's about it. And so if this person here is just focused on making sure their jobs are getting easier, that there's more opportunity, you're growing the organization out so there's a higher career path, possibly better pay, better benefits, better opportunities, all those kinds of things, that's what people notice. They don't really notice, is this person doing all of the critical work or have they handed it off? They don't rate leaders on that scale. Leaders tend to rate themselves that way, and it's an inaccurate scoring system. So what you really want to do is, if you find that in your identity, did I even spell that right? Maybe I just got to cross the T. In your identity, if you have this perspective where you have to be the whole answer, it is unlikely that there will be a smooth succession. That's just how it is. And that'll be on you. If you want there to be a smooth succession, then you really want to actively build an organization that is not dependent on your genius or your smarts or your capacity really to do anything, to be successful, to move forward. In this level, you can provide vision, you can provide mentoring, you're helping orchestrate how all of these folks work together. You can focus on growth. There's a lot of very critical, important responsibilities that the senior leader plays that no one else can play in quite the same way. But these things should not be tied. The critical difference here is they should not be tied to day-to-day operations, sales, or administration of the company. And if all of that is covered by your team, then you will have a very successful, very smooth succession process. So you've just seen how succession planning can protect long-term success instead of stalling it. We also touched on the mistakes that make transitions weak and how to avoid some of those. Ultimately, a leadership succession doesn't have to slow you down. It can be proof that your company is built to last. But here's the thing. Even the greatest leaders can't steer a ship that's full of internal conflict. And in the next video, I'll show you how to prevent conflict from taking root in your organization before it disrupts your team.